it's not spoken enough how much people eat or drink things to avoid feelings. And so to remove that and to sit with a lot of grief, actually, I would say, about how bad I was feeling, but to feel that capacity open up was so healing on, I would say, a spiritual level.
Hello and welcome back to the You're Great podcast with your host, Unique Hammond. Today's guest is Sam. She was in my 12-week group back in May, and it was so beautiful supporting her journey, recognizing that for her, it was a very different journey than it was for a lot of the people in the group. For her, it was really a spiritual, emotional awakening of sorts and a reckoning, really. And every step of the way, she really shared that journey with me, and it was such an honor to support. And I've been there. I've so been there where eating well-ish, taking care of myself-ish, and not taking up more space in my life and with my friends or family, and just really trying to pretend that I was like everybody else, and to actually begin to stand my ground and treat my body the way it needed to be treated and step away from the social acceptability and approval really created a lot of tension in myself and in my life. It was truly eye-opening to see who was really in my life as love of me and who I was in their life just for fun, and it wasn't about all of me. And I think when we begin to contemplate stepping away from these socially acceptable ways of connecting, coffee, alcohol, desserts, sugar, and standing in a different space, that it becomes very confronting. Also, Sam and I recently had a dialogue around unseen disease and how it's easy to walk around thinking we understand what someone else is going through. And we don't, quite honestly. I remember before I got sick, I would see super skinny girls and I would be like, oh, they need to eat a burger. And then I became that super skinny girl who couldn't eat because Crohn's was literally digesting my insides, and I never looked at a super skinny person that way again. Instead, when I see a super skinny person, I think they're struggling with something. I don't know what that something is, but they're struggling and they deserve my compassion. So illness really changed me for the better. I don't walk around thinking I know what someone else is going through, and I'm open and curious to the conversation. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Sam. I know I did. Hey, Sam.
Hi. I'm in Iceland. There was a huge storm today, but now it's really
Awesome.
Yeah.
How is Iceland?
I mean, it's amazing. I love it here. The weather has been not great, which is kind of typical, but yeah, it's really pretty, really nice, really good place to be. So
You're there, I guess, a great place to start, because I was about to ask you a question. I was looking at your schedule because it looks like you're doing theater there. Is that right? Are you teaching theater there, or do you have a show?
So no, I did a theater piece in Poland last week, and then I came here and did like visuals for a concert at a music festival. I will present a theater piece here in June, but this time I was just like showing projections of films, and it was a little bit more low key. So yeah.
Sounds amazing. So I was totally messing around on your website before you got on, and I was like, okay, baddie over here. A multidisciplinary artist, performer, director of theater and film and movement. I so seldom get to see the other side of my client's life because I work with them just on a nutrition level. So to actually kind of dive into who you are a bit through your website, I was like, oh, amazing. Like, this incredible work.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
How did this become your way, your path in life?
Oh my gosh. Well, actually, it's interesting because I think it's very related to health. I mean, I am one of those people that I always knew I wanted to be an artist for sure. That was just from the beginning, very true for me. But interestingly enough, I wanted to be a dancer. And so I was training in dance, but then when I was 16, I got diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And at that time, also, I think with where technology was with diabetes, it was really hard for me to continue dancing. So then I went down the route of studying acting and theater. Was really lucky. I went to a school called Cal Arts. It's actually near where you live, and studied theater. And basically, it all went from there. I just kept creating, and now I work again in dance and have kind of reclaimed that in my own way. Yeah, so it's just always been my passion, and I couldn't help but do that with my life. So, yeah.
I love that. I love that. And when, to kind of bring it full circle, when did you, so at 16, you were diagnosed with type 1, but do you remember before you were diagnosed, like experiencing things going on that you just didn't understand?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I got really, really sick. I lost a lot of weight. I was really dehydrated, like a lot of the similar symptoms people get when they get diagnosed with type 1. Also, a huge mental downward spiral, I would say. It was interesting too because at the time my pediatrician was out of town. And so when I went to the pediatrician, it wasn't the person who knows me. So I think if she had seen me, she would have been like, "Oh my God, you're, tiny and this is not you." But it was this other person. And so they were like, "It's probably the flu, but we'll just do a blood test." And then, of course, the rest is history. But I do remember knowing that I was very ill. Like, I didn't know what it was, but I was so young, when you're 16, it's also there's so many hormones, you already your brain is a construction site, so I thought, "Oh, maybe I'm just depressed," but yeah, so there were really intense symptoms for sure.
And was it to become regulated? Did that happen pretty quickly once you started getting insulin, or was it kind of a journey to come back to what felt like yourself at the time?
To be honest, in the beginning, and this is my pattern also is in a stressful situation, I handle it really well, and then I kind of process it later and kind of fall apart later. So it was sort of I mean, I was in the hospital for probably 2 weeks because it took a while to get me, back into a safe zone with my body. But so my blood sugars were really good, I learned how to, at the time it was injections and, finger pricks. There was no glucose monitor, no pump at that time yet for me. And so I had the blood sugars really under control, but I think I was in shock. And so it was about 3 months later, I definitely got kind of depressed, and I think it was just really traumatic, also to realize I now have this illness that I will have forever, and it's sort of to this day, difficult to process that, so, and I was so young, and also very importantly, I didn't necessarily have a family system where I had a lot of support. I knew I'd have to handle it by myself. So that was a lot. And I think that's actually really important to name how having support from other people greatly impacts our health, I think. So it was hard. And I would say too that it took a while for me to choose myself. It was also interesting because, type 1 diabetes is considered a disability. And so I had the option to be on disability at school. And so I couldn't get in trouble for missing. And I think that was really good. But I also struggled with that identity, I think. And when I went to drama school, I decided not to be on disability because I wanted to be like everybody else, you know? But the downside of that was that I kind of pushed myself past my limits sometimes because I wanted to, keep up.
Yeah.
So and I can't believe I went to, a super intense drama school training program at 18, and I had only had diabetes for, a year and a half. And I still look back and I'm like, "How did I do that?" And very interestingly, one of my professors, who's a dear friend of mine, And I would say that, it was an amazing program, but they did not have a discourse on how to deal with people. I mean, those conversations are only happening now, about accessibility. And so there were a lot of difficult moments like with faculty and stuff. But one of my teachers, her son got diagnosed with diabetes a few years ago. And her and I are good friends. And she said to me once, like, I don't know how you did this acting program, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, so it's like it's not a linear journey, Yeah, diabetes is like a science experiment every day, basically.
It's a life-threatening disease, right? You are maintaining a very fine balance of glucose, and insulin. Like that is an art. That is an art in itself.
Yeah, definitely.
How common is it for somebody to be diagnosed at 16 with type 1 diabetes?
Well, this is one of like the myths about type 1 is that people think like people are born with it or they get it really young, but you can actually get it at any point in your life. Yeah. And I
Yeah, I've
Go
heard that too. It's like, oh, you're born with type, but really most of the people I've met, it's been 10 years old or, it's like,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and I know people who've gotten it who are in their 40s or their 50s, and I mean, I think it's very often associated with, autoimmune, but so many different things can trigger autoimmune. Like I know a woman who had cancer and it was like she did cancer treatment and then she developed type 1 diabetes, and so there's so many, but I also know many people who have a traumatic experience and like something about that experience, like their body, but they say the body keeps the score, like that can also trigger it. It can run in the family, but no one else in my family actually has it.
Does
So
anybody have an autoimmune condition?
yes, yeah, people have some autoimmune stuff, but nobody has type 1. So that was also interesting. Like when I was diagnosed, every doctor would come in and say, who in your family has it? And I was like, nobody. So it's fascinating. Some people also wonder if it can be environmental, because like in the region where I grew up, there's a very high number of young people with type 1, more than average.
No way.
So yeah, in Massachusetts where I grew up, like the high school that I went to, there were like more than average young people with type 1. So yeah, it's a bit of a mystery. I'm by no means an expert, but yeah, you can get it at any time, which is unfortunate, but you know.
Well, it's interesting because nobody in my family had Crohn's disease and obviously autoimmune condition as well. And when I was diagnosed, they were like, oh, who in your family has autoimmune? And I was like, nobody. And I called my mom and I was like, does any of your side of the family? And, kind of run this hunt to kind of figure out like, okay, who gave me these subpar genes?
I will find out.
Make fun of you. The genetic lottery, because they were just like, oh, it's a genetic, So it obviously it is, and somewhere that happened in the way I was living, triggered this genetic mutation, supposedly. And I mean, I was definitely living under a lot of chronic stress. What we do know is chronic stress can trigger all kinds of issues in the human body. And so how it manifests is different. For me, it was small intestine. For you, so it's like, it's interesting. Like how I think of it as the Achilles heel, right? It's like, what is our individual Achilles heel? And mine was digest.
Yeah.
So it always does make me wonder, quite honestly, if I'm able to put something like Crohn's into remission, how come something like type 1 can't be put into remission? Like if you can turn a gene off, are there some conditions that you just can't turn off? Is like the question I always have in my mind of like, if you can, because mine, the conversation is like, oh yeah, mine's in remission, but it can be triggered out because that's my genetic disposition at any time, right? So it's interesting because I feel like I'm definitely living my life in respect to my Achilles heel.
Yeah.
It's like,
Love that.
yeah, it's like I've met you. I see you. I'm not fucking with you.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and I think it can be controversial or triggering, but also a true thing I think about illness is that, and I feel this about myself, is that in a way it is a teacher, and it can put us on a healing path, and that can be a blessing. Not to say that we're grateful for the trauma of medical issues. Like I would love to not have type 1 diabetes, but I think there is a reality that all of us, through whatever may happen in our lives, at some point we become sick and at some point we become disabled in life. That is the fact of our lifespan. And one of the things that I feel is that through experiencing that early on, I think I live a much more intentional life from an early age, and for reasons that, of course, I wish I didn't have this extra full-time job that is a chronic illness and a disability, but it's absolutely shifted my perspective on life, on spirituality, on my relationships, on how I spend my time, how I treat my body, and also like culture, how culture treats people's bodies.
And I want
Yeah.
to hear more about that because that really is what created today's conversation.
Yes.
The full circle moment of like I posted. Hold on, I gotta go
No, you
back.
gotta pull it up.
Gotta pull it
I
up.
was gonna ask you to pull it up. So basically, for people listening, this was like a classic moment, but we're so evolved, unique, that she posted something and I was like, that triggers me. And then you were like, oh, let's get on the podcast and talk about it. And I was like, I love this.
Because it's important, and I think the top line to me is unseen disease. And
Yeah,
in the health world, like I have an unseen disease. And so people will go, oh, like she's living really restrictively. And I don't see it that way because my illness is restrictive that I don't see my dedication as restrictive. I see it as like I'm free. I'm free because I get to move around the world healthy, which wasn't my condition for 5 years. So
absolutely.
right. So this conversation of unseen disease, I think there's a lot of people that feel the way you feel and the way I feel like I'm in remission, but by no means can I rest on my laurels.
Absolutely.
As most people with Crohn's have flares, like they're in remission and they're on medication, but they're having flares throughout their lives. They're going like I meet them every day. I'm like, oh yeah, I was on medication for the first 5 years, and now I'm on this medication because that medication stopped working. So the lifespan of Crohn's disease is that you flare throughout your life until it kills you, or you've lost all your intestines and you left with a bag. And so unseen disease is such an interesting thing because I believe a lot of people are walking around look normal. You look beautiful and healthy and vibrant and you're living this full life, but it's not because you're the classic definition of healthy, right? It's like
Yeah.
you are a functioning person with disease and disability. And that's amazing. But it needs to be a conversation as well. And so when you said, like, hey, so I posted a healthy, strong body is the ultimate symbol of self love. It shows you have patience, discipline, work ethic, and self control. And these are all things that really resonated to me about how I got into remission and how I maintain remission, right?
Yeah.
You were like, Brew, I'm feeling this on a different level.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, and, I also, like, know, I mean, and I said this when I also, like, sent her a private message. I did not troll the comments, like, it
Yes,
was
thank you.
very, like, it was very kind, but I was like, because for me, I'm like, sometimes I do everything that I think I was supposed to do that day to have a healthy body that I can rely on, and it doesn't work, right? And and at the same time, I fully like, also, like, I do the Bean protocol, like, I am a fan, like, we are in this together, and that was why I was like, this is actually a really important piece for me because, like, that is part of my experience that for me, sadly, I mean, yes, self-love. I have become healthier through the self-love I have. And, you know, sometimes shit goes sideways with chronic illness, you know? And I think that sparked like this very interesting exchange of voice notes between us where we were like, talking also about like what is viewed in society as like healthy or like how do we work to make our bodies healthy so that we're more useful to capitalism, like and it's an interesting discourse and like it's both your truth of like I make this fierce commitment to myself and I can celebrate the resilience of my body through my self-love as can I, you
Yeah.
know? And then there's also like yeah, the reality of the fragility of our bodies and also like of imperfection. And so anyway, that was what sparked this fascinating conversation.
Yeah, and I love it so much because it's such a important conversation to have. I don't know about you, but when I was diagnosed, the doctor said diet didn't matter. And I'm sure at 16, like what was the conversation? Like how like Sam, you take insulin for the rest of your life, but don't worry about food. Like what was it? Did it empower you to look down the health path that you're on now? Or
Yeah. And
tell
no, it was literally like, here's some Splenda, like good luck, you know? It was just like it was so bad.
oh no.
And, no, it was just absurd when I look back at it. I think I told you this maybe just like in a private conversation, but I work with a really great coach right now who has type 1 diabetes, which is super helpful. And it's a company called Risely, and they work with type 1 diabetics, and all the coaches have the type 1. And an endocrinologist with type 1 diabetes signed up for coaching because they realized they didn't know enough about diabetes.
Beautiful. Beautiful and scary that they don't know.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, diabetes is such a high maintenance illness. And a lot of endos, like seeing somebody once every 3 months for 15 minutes and they say, change your pump settings. It's like there's so many factors that shift somebody's blood sugar, whether it's hormones, like the weather, exercise, food. Food's one aspect. I mean, food is really complex. Like if I take a shower that's too hot for too long, I get hypoglycemia. Like it's so complex. And that company's really helped me look at, like, my options, and I think that most of the knowledge I get is actually from other people with type 1 diabetes who've, like, done a lot of trial and error, and I think it's once again, doctors are amazing, I'm not trying to say that they aren't, but I think that especially those of us who live with chronic illnesses, like, we are the experts of our body. It's really important to trust that wisdom and to advocate for ourselves. It's really fascinating, like, there was no nutritional there was some, like, eat protein, like, there were some things, but a lot of it has been self-education and stumbling around trying to figure it out over the years.
So I want to rewind a little bit because you just said taking a hot shower for too long will cause your blood sugar to drop. Is that what I heard?
Yes.
No, stop. Really? I always, so what happens to you in a sauna? I want to share some of this stuff so other people understand when they meet someone with type 1 diabetes, this is the life that you are living.
Yeah.
To understand that you cannot tell who has type 1 diabetes by looking at them because it is not about weight. It is not.
No.
That is this misconception of like, because I've met people with type 2 diabetes who are skinny.
Yeah.
It's not a weight thing, like people. Like, please hear this. It's yeah.
Yeah, and there's also a lot of, like, fat shaming involved in that, and body shaming, and judgment about food, like, there's fat phobia in there, there's, like, a lot of things about that that are problematic, and the other thing is, like, type 1 and type 2 are really different, and I think that's where there's a lot of misconception about diabetes in general, is that, like, type 2, which, my knowledge of type 2 is obviously way more limited than my knowledge of type 1, but it is reversible, whereas type 1, as of right now, is not. And, we rely on medical devices, we rely on insulin, our body doesn't make it. And it's a very, very different ball game. And, there are people, Olympic athletes who have type 1, which is amazing. I That must be so much work. I cannot imagine. But it's easy to say that, but it's a lot of work, you know? So, but yeah, there are a lot of invisible things that I think people don't realize with type 1. Like for me, yeah, like if I take a shower that's too hot, I can get low, so I always try to eat before I take a shower. But yeah, like that can become stressful. Like a lot of things people don't even have to think about stuff like that. Or also, if I'm in cold weather, I can get low because, my body's burning more calories if I'm in cold temperatures. But the other piece, like, which is, I think, the biggest one, and people who listen who have type 1 know this very well, is that, low blood sugars are life-threatening for diabetics. And you can think you did everything right, and then you have a low because you went on a walk that was too long, or you accidentally took too much insulin, or you didn't eat enough that day, or because you got distracted doing work, and then suddenly your life is in danger for 20 minutes. And I actually had an experience last week. I was in Poland and I was directing a show. It was a long day. I was super distracted. There were like 10 people asking me questions, and my blood sugar was a little bit high, and I was like, oh, I'll give myself zero point 0.7 units. I gave myself 7 units.
Oh,
Yeah. And I only realized it 15 minutes after I had done it. And I caught it, like I sort of panicked. I said, "Okay, I need some I'm gonna need to pay attention to this." And while I was directing, I was constantly worried that I was gonna have a medical emergency. And I realized that the people around me, I had informed them, but they didn't really know how nervous I really was. That was just another day being with type 1 diabetes, and I was totally fine. I caught it in advance, and I actually have never done that before. I think it was because I was, like, really, really working hard, but that was just like, "Oopsie." You know? It's like, riding on the edge here, you know? So
what did
but
you
one
have to do? Something like when you took too much? Was there something you had to do, or were you just paying attention to how you were feeling?
Yeah, so I paid attention, and, the type of insulin, this is another thing, like, the type of insulin you take takes a certain amount of time to work. So there's a lot of stuff around, like, taking insulin, waiting 20 minutes, then eating when your blood sugar is going down so that when the food hits your bloodstream, it doesn't spike. Like, it's like a whole science experiment. But so I knew that the insulin would take some time to peak, so I had some time to see how it would go. But of course, I kept like some juice next to me just in case I needed sugar. And then, on my glucose monitor, I can see when the arrow's starting to go down. So when the arrow started to go down, I just had a little bit of juice, and then I kept looking at it, but trying not to like take too much sugar so I don't go in the other direction. And it was pretty smooth actually, all in the end. So I just kind of had to take deep breaths, keep working, not panic too much, have something, and have a simple sugar, like not something with protein or fat that would slow down how quick it hits my bloodstream. To actually have like fruit or something like that is best.
If you have too much, then you have the opposite problem.
Yeah,
Like,
you can overcorrect.
yeah. Wow.
And yeah, so it's really tricky. It's a really tricky game, and I used to be an overcorrector because I had a low once that was really scary, and that definitely had a big effect on me. But now I've worked through that, thankfully, and I'm able to pass through those moments with more ease. I think that's very common for diabetics to be afraid of that because, yeah, it can be it can be dangerous.
Do you see any dysregulation with air travel with blood sugar at all, or?
Yeah, mainly because my schedule gets unpredictable, but I try to like there's one thing that's really cool is I have an insulin pump that has something called activity mode, which is like if you're exercising. So it's like if you don't know when your next meal is, or if I'm going swimming, or something like that, it will sort of lower the amount of insulin you get so that you're less likely to go low. So sometimes if I'm traveling, I'll do that because I know I'm carrying heavy bags, or like if the flight is delayed, things like that, I'm not worried that I'm gonna drop. That's what I try to do, but I travel a lot for work.
I was looking at
So
your schedule, and I'm sure that's not even all of it, but I was like, "Whoa, like, when are you actually in Germany?" Like, you're just like,
yeah, yeah. But I mean, the bean protocol really helps. Like actually, that's a huge part of it is like, having nuts, having some hummus, like finding those snacks that will sustain is super helpful. And I think actually it's super, I wouldn't say it's easy necessarily, but it's possible to stay on protocol or like at least protocol adjacent while traveling, you know? So that has been really good. Actually, just this tour that I did in Poland, like I was at home cooking my beans like every day, and it was like the best rehearsal process ever. My friend who I work with, we were hanging out last night. She was like, "You were so good in Poland. Like your energy was so like you weren't stressed." I was like, "Yeah, beans."
And because you have the monitor, you can see how the protocol works for blood. Like, how is it when you're on the protocol? How's your blood sugar?
Yeah. Well, it's great. I mean, the thing is, and I knew this pre-protocol, you know, that like healthy fats and healthy protein are just like number one. Like I've always known that, you know, and that has been my diet. Like that has been my diet. Like basically vegetables and protein has been good to me and my blood sugar. So the bean protocol has only improved it. And so what I see is that, I mean, I do have a raise in blood sugar, but that's actually good, but it's very much like sustained over time. It's not ups and downs, it's not a roller coaster. It of course depends, like certain starches affect my blood sugar differently, but and like how much food I have, but it's really, really great. And as I've told you, my blood sugars are like the best they've been in the 18 years I've had diabetes. So
That's
yeah,
cool. That's
it's
cool.
great. And also the bean protocol has been great for me because along with type 1, with the kind of blood sugar dysregulation one can have, I have a lot of hormonal imbalance. So I've definitely felt like general inflammation in my body is down. But I mean, one of the biggest things I told you too is that I really felt this like emotional, mental balance come out of the protocol and like a huge kind of psychological capacity open up through how the protocol really has regulated my body.
I have a question, and I'm not sure if I'm gonna phrase it up well or not, but I'm gonna do my best here. You've had type 1 diabetes for
18 years.
in the journey of kind of empowerment, self-love, acceptance, like, where do you feel like you are in that journey of, like, "This is me"?
Such a big question. I mean, I think I'm actually in a really, really transformative moment. I think you know that because the protocol was huge for me. And I think it was kind of like, you know, I've always taken care of myself, but I was very much a person, like you said, who looks really healthy. I think this is true about for many diabetics. But I was really stressed out. I was on a roller coaster and I was going through the day saying, how am I going to do this? And that was like and I got to this point, like, last spring right before I went on the protocol where I was like, "I'm ready for change," you know? And I also really saw and like you said in the beginning of the call, like, I do TBM, I've manifested a lot of amazing things in my life, and I felt like I didn't have the energy to enjoy all the things and people and things I get to do. I even remember the last time I was here in Iceland, I was doing an artist residency here in July. In the sun, we were going to caves, we were going to waterfalls, we were making art. It was like magical, and I was so tired. I was so tired. So I went on the protocol in April, I think. And so for me, like the food part was not a huge leap from what I had done before. But for me, as you know, cutting out alcohol and coffee, especially coffee, made me realize that I was on like a roller coaster of dysregulation and also like being exhausted and then having coffee and thinking I needed it to get through the day and suddenly realizing, oh, this has been stressing me out also. I thought I had anxiety. I thought I had all these issues and I just was drinking too much coffee. And also, though, to eliminate, it's not spoken enough how much people eat or drink things to avoid feelings. And so to remove that and to sit with a lot of grief, actually, I would say, about how bad I was feeling. But to feel that capacity open up was so healing on, I would say, a spiritual level. And I've told you this, but I think it's important to hear on the podcast that I had resistance to certain changes I wanted to make around my diabetes care, which was switching to a different kind of insulin pump. For diabetics listening, you'll probably know what it is, but there's something called the Omnipod 5. There's other pumps like this, but it's a closed loop system that talks to a glucose monitor and kind of takes care of it. It corrects your blood sugar to a degree for you, and it's way easier than what I had before, where I had to manually do everything. And I was so afraid to go on it because of my fear of lows, because I had had this traumatic low. And I had spent the past 18 years really being a lone wolf and taking care of myself. It's one of my childhood things. And I started to share with other people what I was going through. And I made two big steps. One was on my glucose monitor, I can have people follow my glucose. So, God forbid I have a low blood sugar and I faint, someone gets a text message. I had been wanting to do this for years, but felt too self conscious, didn't want to be a burden. And I wrote that fucking email. Can I swear on this podcast?
Yes, you can.
And I was so nervous, and I asked people that I love if they would be willing to do it. And like 5 people said yes, you know? And I suddenly had all these people like looking after me and had also these beautiful conversations with people that I love and realized like, oh my gosh. And then from there, my glucose started to get better because I knew if something happened to me, someone would know, you know? And then in August, I made the switch and I asked one of my best friends to stay with me for a few days because I was really afraid. I mean, I was like this looking at it for like 3 days, afraid to sleep, afraid to go on a walk, and then eventually I started to, you know, integrate it. And now that has healed me so much to have and also there's something spiritual about like allowing something else to take care of you. Like, and I even mean the pump. Like I don't have to be in charge of this. This is just in the background taking care of me is actually like a deep spiritual thing. And I think that through the Bean protocol, like yes, I had joint inflammation, that went away. My blood sugars were better, that went away. Like, but I actually was able to see something about my care and my health and my deservingness and have the emotional capacity to process feelings that I was avoiding and could take, like, if we're to use TBM language, like aligned action, that has, I think I'm only discovering now the depth of the healing that I'm going through right now. So I would say the self-love is just enormous. I had an experience a couple years ago with someone who didn't realize they were being very ignorant about type 1 diabetes, someone I work with in the field of dance. And I wrote them an email yesterday, just like fully explaining my experience. And I got actually a really nice response. And I was kind of hard on them, but I was also very kind. But I was like, this needs to be different. Like, it's time for change. Like, we're not doing this anymore, kind of energy. But not from a place of reaction, low self-worth, just like very like, this is my experience and there are other people with it. And this is, important that you know this. I don't think I would have had the capacity to write that.
It's so important because you are illustrating how beautifully you are. Because I heard you when you said you were a lone wolf. You had to do everything yourself. So to have love for yourself and take up space and ask for help, ask for support, like for the little badass loner like Wolverine, that's a big deal. That is a step into your power, into embracing you and also interesting kind of like a reparenting in there as well, to use the language, like you're parenting yourself and trusting and asking and creating space, which I would assume makes you feel very magnetic in the process, right? It's like, oh, Like, here I am. Like, this is me. And I want you to see me. I want my friends who love me to see me. And I want them to understand me. And this person, you obviously, what I hear, and tell me when I'm wrong, is like you respected yourself enough to educate them and send that email. Hey, understand
Yeah.
this is important.
Yeah, and yeah, for the sake of not just myself, but other people. And it was also a person who's in a role of being an educator. So they're dealing with students, and so it felt important to me to say, hey, like, this is important. And yeah, I think it would have been too painful before, but that's also what it is to have a regulated body. It's like we can ride those waves.
And have capacity or for self and other, right? Because you are educating now to people about the unseen disease. And so many women have unseen disease, so many people, not just women, so many people, and to walk around with kindness and understanding is so much more important than walking around thinking we know or understand somebody else's experience. Because what you're having to juggle, you're not just your career, your vocation. You're actually, and to some respect, I would think that there's a lot more people walking around like me managing mine, right? Going, hey, I have to manage my stress and take care of myself so I don't flare. And you're walking around, going, hey, I've got to keep things even. I need to take care of myself. And it actually is, I am curious, when did it kick in, or did you always know you just had to eat well? Like, obviously, alcohol, caffeine, sugar, like, I'm sure that there were times where you're like, yeah, fuck it, and living just, 20s, right?
Yeah. Well, I would one thing I was blessed with is actually my family, like my biological family I grew up with. They work in the food industry, so they have really good taste in food. So I actually grew up eating. I mean, I also ate a lot of like those terrible things all kids ate in the 90s, but in general, actually, I grew up eating pretty like good, really like high quality food. And I was also lucky that I moved to Southern California when I was 18. And it was very popular to eat healthy where I was. And because I was training to be an actor, actually, I was like doing yoga and doing tai chi. And so I got really lucky in that regard. I think also, hopefully those of us as we age, our capacity for like junk food just goes down. So I've had enough experiences of like, oh, I ate that and I know what the consequence is. So I'm just like not interested anymore, which I know is something you talk about. Like with diabetes, you have that like times 50,000, I think. So,
Your immediate feedback says, which is kind of an interesting, yeah, that's interesting.
and also when you get a glucose monitor, you can see like what's happening.
Yeah.
Like you can see, oh, that really doesn't agree with me. And sometimes it's also like, oh, my insulin dosage could be different. And it's not that it's a terrible food, but that I can enjoy this. I just have to figure out how to eat it in a certain way. Like that's also true. But yeah, I just feel better. I mean, that's just the reality. And I think over time that practice has just deepened,
Mhm.
you know.
Mhm. How often do you see something online that is triggering for you?
Oh, actually not often.
Huh.
I would say, yeah, like no. No, I don't think so. I also I mean, I try not to follow things that I find annoying, I guess. But I really don't. I think most of what I follow is like interesting diabetes stuff and like interior design and like witchy shit. That's basically it. And art. But I think like what you're speaking to with the body and all of that. I mean, I don't know. I think I'm really accepting of my body as it is. And so like, even when I sort of said to you, like, "Hey, this post sort of triggered something for me," it was more like I was curious about it, and I knew we could have a really interesting conversation about it.
Me
You know
too.
what I mean? Like, it wasn't like, "Oh," you know?
To me, it's exciting to have honest conversations. Like, I don't want to post into a void. I want to hear the experience and the feedback. And when you reached out and shared, I was like, awesome. And I do think that there is what you just said is so important, that the more we cultivate self-love and acceptance of where we are in our journey in this human body on this life, the less things are triggering because we know who we are and we know our experience and we can see things. However, and I'm a big fan of curating our, especially social media, curating it for what we want.
Absolutely.
And who we want to hear it from. And I'm honored that you are interested in what I share because I really want to put out things that are empowering for us. Challenging. I don't want to be safe. I want to challenge.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is something you brought up on the call, and I want to share this. How did you put it? It was like, we've been socially programmed to think that if we're not having coffee and sugar and alcohol, that we're not having fun. Is that what you said?
Yeah. Or like we can't celebrate. Like it's at every celebration, it's at every family reunion. But I think it's also, yeah, people get uncomfortable with somebody else's like sobriety or yeah, being on protocol or like it's like, but don't you want to have fun? Like, don't you want to relax? Like, oh, I feel so bad for you. And it's like, what, and I think it's like this projection that is so strong. And like I sort of said earlier, that we also rely, I think, food and substances to push down emotions. And I think that was something that I noticed when I was like really, really strictly on the protocol for the first time. I was like, oh, there's a lot of feelings here. There's a backlog, and so, but that also means that we're constantly emotionally dysregulated, you know? So yeah, anyway, but yes, I think because there was someone on the call, I don't remember, they were talking about being in a situation like that, I think. And I was like, yeah.
Well, projection is so interesting because the person is saying, I couldn't be happy or celebrate or have fun without these things. So how is it possible that you can? And again, into the topic of unseen disease, it's like the things that you are managing and looking at are so much bigger than just this moment, right? It's this entire ecosystem that you're balancing at all times. It's a fascinating, that just stayed with me. I have to say, when you brought that up, I was like, yeah, like, why is it so hard? Even people who don't feel good on sugar or alcohol or caffeine still feel compelled to participate because they don't want to be left out.
Yeah. Well, because community is centered around those things, and that can be really challenging, and it's interesting for me because I'm 35. Most of my friends are a lot older than me because most people my age are still, if they're not having babies, like they're still partying a lot, and I feel a bit more resonant with a lifestyle that's a bit more like I'm like, I'd rather go on a walk in the forest and like, you know? And so, yeah, like it's very interesting what is considered like normal, like what is normalcy in our culture? Like I just find it wild that it's normal to like, this is so random, but it relates, like, that you meet someone, say, on a dating app and you get drunk and go home with them. Like, that's normal in our culture. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's a little bit absurd. That's an absurd way to, and then maybe you decide if you like the person after that. Right? Like,
Let's go get disconnected together and see if we can connect.
yeah, that's what I mean. Like, there's just so many things about society that are wild. And so this community piece, and I think I thought of it because of alcohol, like, but that, yeah, we go to connect to disconnect. And of course, I love having a glass of wine and all of that, but I think like it's very interest but to have a very conscious awareness of what we are choosing.
And choosing it instead of not being able to say no is very different.
Yeah, exactly. And also to use it to avoid something or not process something, which is very common and very difficult. And I've definitely done it. And there are also times with diabetes where I've done this myself and I've seen other people do it, where it's like sometimes life is just so stressful that you just want to not think about it.
Yeah.
And I also think not being perfect must be allowed too. Like that's super important. Like to yeah, let yourself off the hook every now and then. But I think it's just about mindfulness, actually, all of it, and self-love. And self-love includes not being perfect, but also saying, how do I have those hard conversations with myself?
Yeah, and also holding ourselves accountable for what we want most in the end. It's like, I know what I want most is to stay in remission. Like that is what I
Yep.
want most for myself. But perfect is also an interesting disconnect too, because I think it totally undermines the human experience. The humanity experience, I think, is a lot of curiosity and trial and error and learning. And then when we learn and we know better, we do better. And we're still kind of navigating the landscape of life. And, so yeah, I really appreciate you. And I appreciate, your sharing your experience and reaching out to me. And I just want to encourage you and anybody else who ever sees my post to reach out and have an honest conversation with me, because it lights me up and it lets me know I'm not alone. Because sometimes you're
Yeah.
to avoid. You're like, "Oh, with the friends."
Yeah. No, but I also think I said this to you privately, and I want to say it on the podcast too, that I think also that you are posting so much stuff around like resilience and strength and accountability and discipline is so important because we actually live in a culture that's like constantly celebrating like lack of discipline, I
Mhm.
think, and pushing, that 5 o'clock cocktail or whatever it is. Self-care is the bubble bath and the chocolate, and all of that stuff. And you're like, I'm gonna do my pull-ups today. And I'm like, there she is again. Look at her go. It's great, and I think it is good to push that and like and let people have feelings about the ferocity of your dedication.
Well,
It's
I look
great.
at you where you are in your career and what you are doing. It took time and effort, repeatedly time and effort, and putting in the time and putting in the effort, and probably a lot of times choosing your craft over other things, and you're doing it too. I think that's what most of us forget, is that we're all doing it. We all have that muscle of dedication, because you wouldn't be where you are now without it. Yeah, you're an artist and that is your soul and that is where you're coming from and that propels you forward, but you still have to put in time and effort. You have that incredible muscle, and I see it because I follow you now, and I'm like, "Damn, girl."
Thank
What
you.
do you want people to know? What is your parting words about the unseen disease and disability? Like, what do you, if you could, like, leave something with the listeners, what would it be?
I think this is for people, yeah, with seen and unseen illness, but just anybody is that like your needs and your boundaries are uniquely yours. And we live in a world that does not tell us that's valuable. And so I really encourage, and this is my practice, I'm by no means an expert, but I just really encourage people to just like build a life that works for you, not just works for you, but that carries you and brings you joy. And if that also means you have less capacity than you thought, and if you go on a trip, you need 2 extra days to rest before you can do something, or you realize your job is not in alignment, or, you need to move to the nature. I don't know, whatever it is, like, just do it. Like, find your way, allow yourself to dream into that. And like, I'm in this process of like, genuinely, what is sustainable and what brings me joy? And what does that look like in also the simplest terms? Those of us also with invisible illnesses, like, try and educate your community, because there are people there who are resources to you and they might really not get it. You might have to say it 10, 15 times, but you're not alone. And you can really create ecosystems of care with people around you.
Mm, beautifully said. really beautiful. Thank you so much, Sam, for being here, for taking time on your really busy schedule to.
Thank you for asking me. So nice to talk.
Oh, like I've been looking forward to this the moment we booked it. I was like,
Me
this.
too.
Yeah, I was like, with you, this conversation right now, all of it, yes, please. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes. And thank you for all the work you do. It's amazing. And yeah, like you're incredible. And also that, like, I know I've said this before, but the way that you coach, I think, is so nuanced and empathetic and like individualized, that it's really about like the whole person, and it's not like one size fits all. And that's really helped me. And it's also been beautiful for me in your coaching, not just the coaching you've given me, but actually watching you work with other people has been so moving and affirming. And I've also learned a lot from that. So lots of gratitude.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. As always, I appreciate your time, and I hope it inspires you to take up space in your life. I also wanted to remind you, if you have a Being protocol, you can join my monthly group coaching. I have 2 groups that meet once a month, once in the morning and once in the afternoon. And I hope to see you there. Take care of yourselves.